Have you ever stopped to think about the weight a simple signature can carry? I'm not talking about any old contract or worthless piece of paper, but about that moment when the tip of a pen glides and changes the course of an entire life. I gave him everything he wanted, and I took it all away with just one signature. That phrase has never left my mind, because it carries within it not only a painful memory, but also the revelation of a hidden truth that had been hidden for years. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you. Back then, I believed that love meant giving everything. Trust was blind, surrender was complete, and my heart insisted that family peace was worth any sacrifice. Have you ever been there, believing that giving more and more was the only way to keep someone by your side? It was precisely at that point that my journey began to take an unexpected turn. I offered gifts, support, attention, even kept secrets. All seemed insufficient to fill that void that was never filled. And as I gave, he asked for more. Life has these ironies, because when we're in the middle of a situation like this, we don't see the signs. Small actions that could reveal the truth are hidden behind pretty words and empty promises. I remember averted glances, conversations interrupted when I entered the room, papers hastily put away as if they were mere inconsequential details. But details always tell a bigger story, and that story was about to explode. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can feel the impact of that time. It was like living in a house with walls painted harmoniously, but with cracks hidden behind the paint. What seemed like unity was actually a silent game of manipulation. And with every gesture of generosity, he responded with more demands, as if there were a natural right to receive without ever giving back. I believed that keeping the family together was more important than questioning, and this was the perfect trap. But all silence has a limit, and all surrender reaches a point of exhaustion. There were nights when I wondered, is this really love, or is it just fear of loss? My mind tried to justify it, but my heart already knew the answer. It was in this conflict between emotion and reason that I realized something. Giving everything may not be an act of love, but rather of self-sacrifice without return. And no one can carry that weight forever. It's curious how certain decisions seem small from the outside, but when they happen, they reveal their true impact. The signature that changed everything wasn't just a bureaucratic act. It was the liberation of years of submission, of unmet expectations, of a trust that had been broken without my knowledge. A simple pen stroked the paper, and in that instant, everything he had built on my silence crumbled. And perhaps that's what's most shocking. How such a quick gesture can bring about such profound transformation. Now I want you to think with me. How many times have you held a truth inside, believing that speaking it would hurt more than keeping quiet? How many times have you held back from acting so as not to destabilize what seemed like a superficial peace? What you'll hear here isn't just about betrayal or family, but about courage, choices, and the impact of finally bringing the truth to the table. Because when secrets kept for decades come to light, no one emerges unscathed. This kind of revelation affects everyone involved. It's not just about who was at fault or deceived, but about how each person deals with the shattering of illusions. Some react with shock, others with anger, and some try to deny it until the end. And at the same time, there's that heavy silence of those who understand the depth of what was revealed, but can't find the words to respond. This silence, more than the screams or tears, is what echoes within us. The phrase, "I gave him everything he wanted, and I took it all away with just one signature," is not only a summary of my story, it's also a reminder of how seemingly small decisions can become turning points. The signature was just the final gesture, but the entire path to that point was paved with choices, fears, silences, and above all, the transformation of who I was and who I have become. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because behind this signature there were hidden secrets, behind the scenes that no one knew, revelations that changed not only my life, but the dynamics of the entire family. And when I think about all this, I realize it's not just my story. How many people, maybe even you who are listening to me now, have gone through something similar? They held back truths, compromised beyond their means, believed they were doing the best, but deep down, they felt like they were fading away. If this topic resonates with you, Leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. I really want to read it because each shared experience creates a space of connection between my story and yours. And your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who also need to hear this kind of content. When you like it, YouTube understands that this message has value, that it shouldn't be hidden, and starts showing it to more people. It's as if you help take this conversation beyond this screen to those who may be experiencing something similar in silence. And if you subscribe to the channel, you're showing me that you want to continue walking with me through these stories, these reflections, these revelations that are so often locked away within us. This gives me the strength to continue bringing this kind of content because I know I'm not speaking alone. I'm building a community with people who understand the importance of giving voice to these truths. Now, as all of this echoed within me, I realized that there were more layers to this story, more secrets that were about to be revealed, and each detail had the power to completely change the way everyone saw that reality. Back then, looking from the outside, my life seemed perfectly organized. The house was always tidy, the windows open to let in sunlight, and every detail seemed carefully placed, as if everything were under control. The family atmosphere conveyed a sense of stability, and those who saw us believed there was no room for conflict. It was like living inside a framed photograph, beautiful but static, unable to reveal what was hidden behind the smile I offered everyone. I truly believed I was doing everything right, that giving in was a demonstration of love, that giving without expecting anything in return was the greatest proof of generosity. But the truth, hidden behind this facade, was something else. There was a heavy silence that hung over the house, a feeling that I was always walking on eggshells, trying to maintain harmony, even if it meant drowning out my own voice. This contrast between the apparent tranquility and the storm brewing within me was so intense that I often doubted what was happening. It was like living in two parallel worlds, what I showed to the outside and what I felt inside. Deep down, there was a void, an unfilled space that, over time, began to turn into weariness, into emotional exhaustion. Because giving him everything he wanted meant giving up small pieces of myself. With each concession, with each decision that left me second, something inside me fell apart. It's strange, but when you believe you're doing the right thing, it takes a while to realize the price you're paying. Only much later did I understand that there's no true transformation when you completely erase yourself for someone else. The strangest thing is that no one around me seemed to notice. I smiled, received visitors, told stories at the dinner table, and everyone left believing I lived in perfect harmony. It was as if the stage was always set, and I, behind the scenes, was striving to keep the curtains from rising completely. This game of hiding what was really happening created an invisible barrier between me and the rest of the world. The impact was silent but devastating, because the loneliness of carrying secrets is something that erodes slowly, silently. Over time, I began to notice small signs that something was off. They weren't explosions, but subtle cracks in eyes, in impatient words, in promises never kept. These were details that might seem insignificant, but together they created a disturbing picture. I found myself faced with difficult choices: continue maintaining the appearance of calm or face head-on the revelations I'd already sensed but hadn't yet had the courage to admit. It's interesting how the mindset of someone who believes they're doing the right thing can become a prison. You convince yourself that you need to keep everything under control, that sacrificing your own desires is a virtue. And for a while, I actually took pride in that. But gradually, that feeling shifted, and that pride gave way to doubt. Was I truly building something solid, or just postponing the inevitable? This question began to echo within me, haunting me in moments of silence. And it was at that point that I began to see that my story wasn't just about love or sacrifice. It was about power, about decisions that shape the course of an entire life, about how a simple gesture can carry a weight no one can imagine. Because giving someone everything they want isn't always a sign of generosity. Sometimes it's just a way to avoid conflict. And avoiding conflict, however comfortable it may seem at first, creates an even greater chasm in the future. I didn't realize it at the time, but every time I said yes to maintaining peace, I was saying no to myself. This was the truth hidden behind the calm. And it was this silent accumulation of denials that pushed me to the brink, that made me realize that living in apparent harmony comes at a tremendous cost. This was the first major revelation that changed the way I saw everything around me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because it is at this point that things begin to take on another dimension, when the mask of normality finally begins to crack and life shows how relentless it can be in the face of poorly resolved choices. Write down, I'm on this journey too, if you've ever felt the weight of carrying a calm that deep down hid a storm. At first, the requests were so small they almost went unnoticed. A little help here, a favor there, something that seemed harmless compared to the affection I felt. I said yes, with the naturalness of someone who believes they're simply strengthening bonds, believing that what is given with love never weighs heavily. But over time, I realized that each yes opened the door to an even greater request. It was as if the trust I offered had become a kind of currency, and the more I gave, the more he felt he could demand. These small gestures, which once seemed simple, began to take on a new tone. With each demand, there was a subtle pressure, a form of manipulation masked by sweet words. Deep down, I sensed it wasn't just about help or support anymore. It was about control. He knew I didn't want to create conflict, that my mindset was to avoid friction at all costs, and he used it as a silent weapon. This was how the hidden truth began to reveal itself. The affection I offered wasn't being welcomed as a gift, but exploited as a weakness. The transformation of this situation was slow, almost imperceptible. There was no clear line separating legitimate requests from absurd demands. It was a journey in which everything blurred together, until I could no longer distinguish where affection ended and manipulation began. Each decision to give in seemed small, but together they formed a chain that bound me. The feeling of being trapped without shackles is one of the most suffocating anyone can experience, because on the outside, everything seems normal, but inside the impact is devastating. I remember one particular day when he asked me something that, immediately, I knew made no sense. My heart sank, and for the first time, I found myself wondering, how far will this go? It was as if an inner voice, stifled for so long, had finally found space to question. But even then, I wavered. I still believed that if I gave in one more time, I could keep the peace, avoid conflict, preserve the appearance of harmony everyone saw from the outside. This was the cruelest part, realizing that the person I trusted was turning my goodwill into an instrument of power. The behind-the-scenes nature of this relationship revealed something very different from what first appeared. While on the outside, everything seemed like a simple family bond. On the inside, each impossible request was further proof that I was losing control of my own life, and it was at this point that the revelations began to hit me harder. I began to notice how the pattern repeated itself. It always began with a request that seemed reasonable, something anyone would say, "Sure, no problem." But then came an addition, an extra detail, until the line between generosity and submission was completely blurred. The worst part was that I didn't know how to set boundaries without feeling like I was betraying everything I believed about love, care, and trust. The psychological impact of this is difficult to explain. It's as if you're always in debt, always owing one more gesture, one more concession, and never reaching equilibrium. The give-it-all mentality becomes a burden when the other doesn't recognize, doesn't return, doesn't reciprocate. And with each step, what was once affection turns into silent resentment. The transformation in the relationship was there, before my eyes, but I still resisted admitting that what once seemed like a display of affection had become a mechanism of domination. There came a point when I realized they were no longer requests, they were demands. The tone of his voice changed, his posture changed. Even the way he looked at me when he spoke seemed to carry the certainty that I wouldn't have the courage to say no. That's when I understood that trust, when misused, can become a devastating weapon. There was no shouting, no explicit violence, but the weight of emotional manipulation can be as destructive as any open confrontation. What struck me most during this period was the contrast. On one side, the appearance of normality. On the other, the backstage full of revelations no one else saw. And it's in this contrast that life reveals its cruelty, because you feel isolated, as if you're the only one carrying that weight, unable to explain it to others without seeming like you're exaggerating. It was in this silence that I began to realize that every decision, every response was shaping not only the relationship, but the way I saw myself. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the truth is that an impossible request never comes alone. It always brings with it a chain of consequences that extend far beyond the moment it's made, and that's when everything starts to change forever. Comment. This makes sense to me. If you've ever felt like every time you said yes, you lost a little bit of yourself. There was a moment when, looking around, I realized there was nothing left I could offer beyond what I had already given. It was as if, along the way, every piece of me had been laid on the table, a total surrender that at first seemed like the price of peace, but which over time revealed itself as complete surrender. I believed with all my heart that by giving in, by satisfying his every desire, I would be building a solid bridge of unity. It felt right, almost natural, because the hope of keeping everything in place, of maintaining that semblance of harmony, was greater than any warning signs that appeared along the way. But naivety also has its weight. There's a part of us that insists on believing that the other, having received so much, will at some point recognize, be grateful, and reciprocate. And I waited for this, silently, like someone awaiting a revelation that never comes. This waiting kept me going, even when exhaustion was already setting in. I told myself that everything would make sense later, that patience would be rewarded, that the hidden truth behind that demanding behavior would one day reveal itself in a more just way. This hope was what drove me, but it was also what held me back. I was so immersed in the idea of preserving the union that I didn't realize the impact this total surrender had on me. It was as if my identity was being diluted, as if every decision was no longer mine, but his. The curious thing is that from the outside, no one saw this. The behind the scenes of this story remained hidden, and what was revealed was merely the portrait of someone generous, dedicated, ready to give everything. And those who observe from the outside often don't understand the weight of living under this logic. When I realized there were no more limits, it was like waking from a dream. I realized I had accepted so much that there was no longer a boundary between what was choice and what was obligation. This revelation was painful, because it showed me how much I had neglected myself in the name of a harmony that, in practice, never truly existed. And yet, within me was a soft voice telling me that all of it had not been in vain, that somehow that surrender, however naive, also carried strength, perhaps because only when we give everything do we realize the emptiness that remains. And this emptiness, as frightening as it may be, is also the space where transformation begins. I began to understand that every gesture of surrender, every decision that seemed to diminish me, was somehow accumulating within me an energy that would later be fundamental to the turnaround. Because naivety may expose us, but it also teaches us, and I learned more than I could have ever imagined. The contrast was stark. On one hand, I carried the pain of having completely surrendered. On the other, the hope that this could still mean something greater. It's strange to think this way, but even in the midst of the storm, there was a part of me that believed that giving everything was a way to prove how committed I was, how willing I was to fight for this relationship, even if it was a silent struggle. This mindset sustained me, even as it consumed me. And don't think this surrender was done without any awareness. I knew, in every fiber of my being, that I was giving up parts of myself. But there was a decision, perhaps even unconscious, that this was the way to go. Because sometimes we prefer to believe a comfortable lie than to face a painful truth. This was the hidden truth I had to admit. I was deceiving myself to endure, and the curious thing is that in a way, I myself was fueling that dynamic by believing I was in control. The impact of this revelation shook me deeply. It was like opening your eyes in a dark room and realizing that the shadow you've always ignored is right there in front of you. Naivety was both a trap and a shield. It left me vulnerable, but it also gave me the chance to see clearly behind the scenes of everything that was happening. I had convinced myself that giving everything was the only way out, but life has a very peculiar way of showing us that no surrender is without consequences. I still remember the feeling, a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Exhaustion because I realized I was exhausted, but hope because somehow I still believed that giving everything had some value. It was a difficult contradiction to bear, but it was also what kept me going. Because in the end, when all seemed lost, the simple fact that I had given so much gave me the clarity to understand that there was nothing left to lose. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we realize that we have given absolutely everything and received nothing in return, something inside us begins to move, and it is in this movement that the greatest revelations are often born. Write down, "I'm on this journey too." If you've ever felt like you gave everything believing that this would keep the peace, it's curious how things begin slowly, almost invisible, like small cracks in a seemingly solid wall. At first, I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I told myself they were just unimportant details, that my tired mind was inventing signs. But the signs were there, insistent, begging to be noticed. The first of them came in the form of strange glances, too quick to be mere distractions, but intense enough to carry an inexplicable weight. There was something in those eyes that avoided mine, as if hiding were safer than facing them. Then came the words cut off in mid-sentence, sentences that began with meaning but died before they could finish. I noticed the pauses, the awkward silences, the hastily shifted subjects. It was like watching a play where the actors forget their lines but remain on stage, feigning naturalness. Except, unlike a performance, I was part of the plot and felt, increasingly, that behind the scenes a hidden truth lay hidden. Secrets began to accumulate in the form of whispers. I heard doors closing too quickly, low voices cutting off as soon as I entered the room. And even though there was no concrete proof at the time, intuition was already screaming inside me. Intuition, that silent companion, is often more accurate than any tangible evidence. And yet, I hesitated to believe it, perhaps because accepting those signs meant facing a betrayal I wasn't ready to face. Over time, the atmosphere changed. It was as if the air inside the house had grown denser, charged with something no one could name, but everyone could feel. The trust, once natural, now felt fragile, like a thread stretched to its limit. Every gesture, every word, every silence seemed to carry a hidden meaning, and I began to live on constant alert, trying to decipher what was happening. This search for answers became part of my journey, a silent investigation that consumed me with thought, even in the simplest moments. And it was at this stage that I realized how treacherous our mindsets can be. I wanted to believe I had everything under control, that my total dedication had been enough to guarantee loyalty and respect. But the hidden truth was already beginning to reveal itself, and the impact of this discovery was like an unexpected blow. It was as if a mirror had shattered before me, revealing that the image I'd seen until then had never been complete. The signs were everywhere, but I clung to hope, because sometimes hope is more comforting than reality. I convinced myself that those distant glances were just fatigue, that the interrupted words were distractions, that the whispers were nothing more than small talk. This was the narrative I created to protect what remained of the peace I believed I had built. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. It's amazing how slowly transformation happens. First, you doubt yourself. Then you begin to accept that perhaps you're not imagining it, until, at a certain point, there's no denying that something profound is happening. I went through each of these stages, my heart heavy and my mind full of questions. What was happening behind the scenes in my own life? What was the truth they were trying so hard to hide? This uncertainty became a daily burden, a burden I carried without being able to share it with anyone. Because admitting the possibility of betrayal is like opening a door that may never close again. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I wanted to believe the best, but with each passing day, reality pushed ever clearer signs before my eyes. And the more I tried to ignore them, the more they multiplied. And the most painful thing was realizing that my total surrender, that gesture of giving everything in the hope of maintaining the union, had become fuel for the distance. I realized that the more I gave in, the further he drifted away. It was as if my generosity had become a license for loyalty to be set aside. This was a difficult revelation to accept because it meant facing the fact that I myself, without realizing it, had fueled that unequal dynamic. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the signs of betrayal are not only about the other person, but also about ourselves, about how we react, about how we decide to see or ignore it, and about the consequences that arise when we let fear guide our choices. Comment: This makes sense to me if you've ever felt like the signs were right in front of your eyes, but were afraid to face what they really meant. The shock of discovery doesn't happen suddenly, as many imagine. It builds silently, little by little, until the moment comes when there's no escape. I remember exactly the moment when doubt ceased to be doubt and became certainty. It was as if a veil had been ripped from my eyes, revealing a scene that had always been there, but which I, out of fear, chose not to see. That hidden truth, which until then had hid in the shadows, took shape, voice, and weight, changing everything at once. My heart races, my body seems to lose strength, and my mind fills with questions that never stop echoing. How had I not realized it before? How could someone who had received everything they asked for return such coldness? The betrayal lay not only in the act itself, but in the prolonged deception, in the sweet words that now sounded like poison. It was like discovering that the ground that supported me was nothing but quicksand, and that each step I had taken up until that point had sunk me a little deeper. That moment showed me something profound about the human mindset. We want to believe in what comforts us, even when all signs point to the contrary, and I did just that. I ignored the looks, silenced my intuition, and sought justifications for the unjustifiable. But the revelation hit me with an irreversible impact, proving that no hope can erase reality when it decides to impose itself. The journey that until then seemed like a path of dedication and surrender transformed, in seconds, into a territory of pain, loss, and disappointment. And it's curious how, in the midst of pain, an unexpected clarity also emerges. I finally understood that everything that had been whispered in secret, all those interrupted words, were merely fragments of a truth hidden behind the scenes. The betrayal wasn't an accident, but a conscious choice, fueled by the certainty that I wouldn't dare question it. This was perhaps the cruelest blow, realizing that the trust I offered had been used as a shield to cover up the lies. I've thought a lot about the decisions that lead us to these moments. Every small choice, every omission, every concession made in the name of peace becomes fertile ground for the hidden truth to grow, silently, until it becomes impossible to ignore. And when that moment arrives, transformation is inevitable. You're no longer the same person after facing what you tried to avoid for so long. The impact of this discovery goes beyond pain. It reshapes the way you see the world, people, and even yourself. I remember how the words echoed that day, as if the entire universe had stopped so I could absorb every detail. There was no more room for illusions, no more making excuses. It was real. He had chosen to betray, to hide, to manipulate. It felt like standing before a broken mirror. I saw fragments of the life I thought I had, but none of them fit together anymore. And the most painful thing is that, deep down, part of me already knew. This revelation brought with it a mix of feelings: anger, sadness, disbelief. But it also brought a strange sense of freedom. Because cruel as it was, I finally had the truth in my hands. It was no longer a mystery that consumed me in silence. It was stark reality, ready to be faced. And paradoxically, the pain of discovery also gave way to a new form of strength. A strength that arises when you realize you can no longer be fooled. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic because discovery isn't just about the other person, but about ourselves. It's about how we react when everything we believe in crumbles, about how we rebuild our mindset after seeing the hidden face of those who were by our side. It's at this point in the journey that we begin to understand that the greatest transformation comes not from what we discover, but from what we do with that truth. And I want you to reflect with me. Have you ever felt like your whole world changed in a single instant when a hidden truth came to light? If so, you know what I'm talking about. Write down, "I'm on this journey too," because sharing this experience can be the first step toward transforming pain into learning and revelation into strength to move forward. The weight of the decision was perhaps one of the most painful stages of this journey. After the shock of the discovery, there was no way to simply pretend nothing had happened. The truth was already there, pulsing before me, robbing me of sleep and stealing my peace. But at the same time, I knew that any action I took would have a huge impact, not only on me, but on everyone around me. It was like holding a flame in my hands. If I smothered it, I would burn myself silently. If I let it out, I could set everything ablaze. This duality consumed me. and the dilemma of remaining silent or taking action grew heavier with each passing day. Within me, two voices were constantly battling. My heart, which insisted on protecting itself, told me that love, however wounded, still deserved a chance. This voice reminded me of the good memories, of the moments when I believed in sincerity, of the idea of preserving the appearance of family unity. But there was also the voice of reason, firm and relentless, telling me that hiding the truth was fueling lies, that allowing silence was condoning betrayal. It was like living between two worlds, one in which I remained the guardian of a devastating secret, and another in which I took responsibility for exposing everything, even knowing the consequences. This dilemma made me reflect on the mindset we carry in times of crisis. We often believe that loyalty lies in remaining silent, in enduring, in carrying on our shoulders the weight of what shouldn't belong to us. But there's a difference between protecting and imprisoning. Silence, which at first seemed like a way to avoid chaos, began to transform into an unbearable burden. Every glance exchanged, every unspoken word, every gesture hid a layer of pain that only I knew. And living with this hidden truth was like breathing in a windowless room. The nights were the hardest. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I had the courage to change the course of this story. My thoughts raced through the possibilities. If I revealed everything, there would be destruction, tears, and ruptures. But if I remained silent, I would be allowing the lie to continue to dictate the rules, eroding not only my trust, but also my remaining dignity. It was a choice between hurting or being hurt, between causing immediate pain or living in constant pain. It was during this process that I understood the true impact of the decisions we make. They aren't limited to the moment they're made, but echo through time, shaping what comes next. The decision to remain silent or to speak out wasn't just about that moment, but about the kind of person I would become from then on. Would I be someone who resigns herself and adapts to lies, or someone who faces revelations head-on, even if it meant losing everything? This was the transformation that awaited me, and I knew there was no escaping it. This dilemma also taught me a lot about courage. Courage isn't just about facing others, but about facing yourself, admitting that the path I'd chosen up until that point had perhaps been naive, perhaps motivated by blind hope. The weight of the decision lay precisely in accepting that, in any case, nothing would ever be the same again. The illusion had been shattered, and with it, the security I thought I had. And as I reflected, I realized that every detail of that secret hidden in the shadows pushed me out of the zone of silence. It was as if the universe itself was telling me it was time to stop being a spectator and become the protagonist of my own story. I had to choose between carrying the lie or facing the storm. And, as painful as the idea of revelation was, there was a flame within me that told me that the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to break free. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this moment of choice is the turning point in any journey of transformation. It's when we discover who we truly are and what we're made of. It's when the masks fall and what remains is just our bare essence, faced with the responsibility of making decisions. It was there that I understood that sometimes protecting others means losing yourself, and that the true act of love is often telling the truth, even when it hurts. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a situation where silence seemed easier, but your conscience wouldn't let you rest? Comment. That makes sense to me, because sharing this feeling can show that we're not alone on this journey of difficult choices. The signature that changed everything wasn't just a formal act on a piece of paper. It was a silent scream, a definitive break with a story that no longer made sense. I remember the pen slipping, the tip scratching the document, and in that moment, it felt like the weight of years was concentrated in a simple movement of my hand. It was as if each written letter carried all the pain, the anger, the frustration, but also the strength I never imagined I had. He, so certain that nothing would ever change, so convinced he would always be in control, didn't even realize how much that gesture symbolized. For him, it was just bureaucracy. For me, it was liberation. The room seemed permeated by silence. It wasn't the silence of calm, but the tension that precedes a storm. The air felt heavy, and even the sound of the pen scratching the paper seemed to echo like thunder within me. I knew nothing would be the same after that signature. It represented not only a rational decision, but the victory of reason over a heart that, for too long, had been deceived by false promises. It was as if, in a single act, I had torn away the veil that covered the hidden truth and allowed reality to reveal itself undisguised. The impact of this moment was overwhelming. On the one hand, there was the pain of ending a cycle, of accepting that what seemed like unity had become a stage for lies and manipulation. On the other, there was also an almost indescribable sense of power, as if I had finally regained control of my own journey. This duality was intense, liberation and grief walking side by side. It was a shock of revelations that only those who have experienced a rupture of this magnitude can understand. As I stared at the signature there, definitive, it was impossible not to reflect on everything that had led me to that moment. Every impossible request, every total surrender, every sign of betrayal, everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle that only made sense now. It was like looking behind the scenes of a play that, on the outside, seemed perfect, but inside hid flaws, cracks, and truths no one dared face. The difference was that at that moment, I was no longer backstage. I had stepped onto the stage and with that gesture, changed the script forever. This choice made me realize something even more profound. True transformation doesn't happen when the world around us changes, but when our inner mindset expands. Before, I believed that loving meant giving, yielding, accepting, enduring. But in that moment, I realized that loving myself was the missing step. The signature was much more than a break with him. It was a pact I made with myself, a commitment to never again allow lies to have a place in my life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it's not just about a romantic breakup or a revealed betrayal. It's about understanding the power of decisions that, at first glance, seem small, but carry within them the capacity to transform entire lives. How often do we postpone change for fear of the consequences? How often do we let the illusion of stability trap us in invisible prisons? The truth is, deep down, we know when something is over, but we lack the courage to acknowledge it. And it was precisely this courage that in that moment I found. And perhaps most impressive is realizing that the signature didn't erase the pain, didn't eliminate the wounds, but rather initiated a new phase in which the pain was no longer a prison, but an impulse. It was the beginning of a journey of reconstruction, of relearning to trust myself, of looking to the future with a renewed mindset. The impact was immediate, but the effects would continue to unfold over time, showing that sometimes a simple gesture carries within it a silent revolution. Right there, I'm on this journey too, because this act of liberation, of choosing yourself in the face of lies, is something that connects more people than we imagine. The unexpected reactions were like a broken mirror, reflecting 1,000 different fragments of the same scene. Each person who looked at me seemed to carry their own interpretation of my decision, and this made me realize how each look was, in fact, a silent judgment. Some showed support with that discreet gleam in their eyes, almost as if they were finally seeing in me the courage they themselves perhaps never possessed. Others, however, carried denial, an attempt to downplay the gravity of what had happened, as if it were easier to deny the truth than to face it head-on. Shock spread through the room like a whisper too loud to ignore. There were those who looked at me with admiration, and those who looked at me with anger. This duality was one of the most impactful because it revealed something I had never realized so clearly. When you decide to break a chain, not everyone is happy with your freedom. Some feel inspired, others feel threatened, because your transformation shakes the invisible structures that sustain their comfort. I understood that my signature was not just an individual act. It became a movement that reverberated among those around me, forcing each one to take a stand against the hidden truth that could no longer be suppressed. Behind the scenes, there were whispered comments, questions not asked aloud, but which echoed through the hallways of the house and at family gatherings. It was as if everyone was searching for someone to blame for their discomfort. Some pointed to him, highlighting his flaws, his mistakes, his inability to keep what he'd been given. Others, however, blamed me for having the courage to expose what they'd preferred to keep hidden. This division not only marked that moment, but also brought to light revelations about the people around me that I might never have discovered had it not been for this event. It was painful to realize that some of what I considered unconditional support was actually sustained by convenience. The impact of my decision revealed relationships that only lasted because no one dared touch the silence. At the same time, it revealed the strength of genuine bonds that flourished precisely in the midst of the storm. It was in these looks of silent support, in these discreet gestures of care, that I found confirmation that, despite my apparent loneliness, I was not completely alone. The curious thing is that this mixture of shock and denial wasn't just about them. It was about me, too. It was as if each reaction was a direct response to my act of liberation, and I had to learn to deal with it without letting it shake me. This was one of the greatest lessons, understanding that when we make big decisions, we need to be ready to deal not only with the direct consequences, but also with the impact they have on others. The journey of transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It affects the entire web of relationships around us. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is where something rarely discussed comes in: how external reactions can make us doubt our own decisions. When someone you love looks you in the eye with disapproval, it's natural to feel the weight of doubt, as if perhaps you've made a mistake. This is when your mindset needs to be firm, because it's easy to get lost in the midst of judgments. The hardest revelation is realizing that the person you expected to hold your hand isn't always there, and, at the same time, discovering the strength of unexpected hands that reach out when you need them most. This experience showed me that the hidden truth about people is revealed precisely in times of disruption. It's when everything falls apart that the masks fall and the behind-the-scenes become visible. Suddenly, you realize who was there just for the beautiful scenery and who is truly willing to walk with you down the bumpy road. This is impactful because it completely changes the way you see the world around you. It's as if, amidst the chaos, you've been given a new map, more honest and raw, but also more useful to guide your next steps. Deep down, I realized that unexpected reactions were a fundamental part of my journey. They forced me to mature, to let go of the need to please everyone, and to understand that freedom requires sacrifice, because there is no transformation without loss, no rebirth without leaving something behind. And even though this realization hurts, it opens space for a truer life, built on solid foundations, not illusions. Comment below. That makes sense to me, because I know I'm not the only one who has faced the weight of unexpected reactions after a big decision. The consequences of that day weren't limited to a single moment. They unfolded like ripples that spread when a stone is thrown into a lake, touching every area of my life, one by one, without asking permission. At first, the silence seemed louder than any words. I would wake up and feel the weight of a new reality, still trying to understand if it was liberation or just an open wound. The pain was real, sharp, as if each memory were a blade scratching the skin of memory. But at the same time, there was something different hovering in the air, a feeling of emptiness that, little by little, began to reveal itself as space. Space for the new, space for rebuilding, space for myself. He, on the other hand, reacted with a mixture of disbelief and anger. He couldn't accept that everything had changed with a simple gesture, that a firm decision had enough power to turn his life upside down. His denial showed me how, for so long, he believed he had absolute control. And seeing that control crumble before his very eyes was, for him, a downfall. For me, it was an awakening. Here was the clear revelation that I no longer needed to carry what was never mine to carry. The transformations didn't happen overnight. They were slow, painful, and full of ups and downs. There were days when I cried until I had no more strength, and nights when the silence seemed to crush me. But there were also small moments of victory. The first time I could sleep peacefully, the moment I realized I could smile without guilt, the discovery that my voice, once muffled, now sounded clear and firm. These were signs that I was being reborn, even if this rebirth came with scars. It's curious how pain, when faced, can become fuel. I used to think courage came from always being strong, but I discovered that true courage comes when we allow ourselves to be fragile and still choose to move forward. This mindset was one of the biggest changes in me. I stopped trying to fit into patterns that imprisoned me and began to see myself as someone on a constant journey, learning, making mistakes, getting things right, but never again erasing myself to fit into someone else's world. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there's something that's almost never said when we talk about radical decisions. The internal impact is as transformative as the external. It's not just about what changes around you, but what changes within. I needed to revisit old beliefs, question truths I'd taken for granted, and open myself to a new vision of myself. It was as if I had access to the backstage of my own mind, where all my insecurities and also all my hidden strengths were stored. There, between shadows and lights, I found the opportunity to rebuild myself authentically. And this reconstruction came not only in the form of strength, but also in sensitivity. I learned to see the signs around me more clearly, to value small achievements, and to no longer ignore my own intuition. Every decision that once seemed impossible was now seen as part of a process of evolution. I no longer needed to fear the consequences, because I had already experienced the greatest of them. The hidden truth I so feared had been revealed, and this freed me from the burden of imagining scenarios. The worst had already happened, and surviving it showed me that I could survive anything. Of course, the transformation wasn't just mine. He changed too, but in a completely different way. While I rose, he immersed himself in attempts to regain what he'd lost. The impact of my decision left scars on him, scars that may never heal. But that was the difference between us. While I viewed the consequences as part of a journey of rebirth, he saw them as condemnation. And this difference in mindset explained much about why we'd arrived at this point. The most surprising thing was realizing that this personal transformation also began to influence other areas of my life. Old relationships were rethought, new professional paths began to emerge, and even my way of seeing the future changed. I no longer sought the approval of others, but rather coherence with myself. And this is liberating, because when you stop living to meet external expectations, you discover an almost inexhaustible energy to build the life you truly desire. I know this all sounds overwhelming, but beauty lies in its intensity. The pain that once seemed like a sentence has become a bridge. And this bridge has taken me to a place where I finally recognize myself without needing to hide. Every scar carries a story, every choice brings a revelation, and every step taken after a fall is a reminder that rebirth is not only possible, it's necessary. Right there. I'm on this journey too, because I want to know who else has already experienced a transformation that was born from the consequences of a painful decision. When I look back and revisit every detail of this story, I realize that the greatest transformation didn't come from the pain of betrayal or the strength I needed to summon to sign that paper. It was born from the silent reflection that accompanied me in the following days, when I finally understood that giving everything, without limits, was not an act of love, but a way of losing myself within someone who never knew how to value me. This revelation was hard, almost cruel, because it forced me to face the hidden truth that for a long time I had confused surrender with annulment. I believed that being available, giving up, always giving in, meant preserving the union. But deep down, what I was doing was disappearing a little each day. The turning point was realizing that courage isn't just about standing up to someone or signing a life-changing document. True courage is having the audacity to look within, face the depths of your own soul, and admit that you can no longer continue being who you're not. It was at that point that I realized that love without respect becomes a prison, and that sacrifice without reciprocity becomes a burden that corrodes you from within. The impact of this understanding shook me on every level. It was as if a blindfold had fallen from my eyes, and suddenly I could see not only what he had done to me, but also what I had allowed out of fear of loss. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the true lesson isn't just cutting ties or walking away from those who hurt us. The great revelation comes when we understand that every decision we make shapes our mindset. I could have chosen to fill myself with resentment, to live carrying the weight of anger and disappointment. But I decided differently. I used the pain as raw material to rebuild who I was. This was the choice that gave meaning to everything. Instead of asking myself, why me? I started asking myself, what for? And the answer was clear: to show me that I was much stronger than I imagined, and that freedom only exists when we stop accepting less than we deserve. There were days when this reflection made me cry alone, but there were also days when it made me smile with an almost inexplicable strength. It's a strange balance. While mourning what I lost, I celebrated what I finally gained, myself. And deep down, this is the greatest victory anyone can achieve, because houses, possessions, alliances, promises, all of these can be taken away, destroyed, or forgotten. But the knowledge that you have regained power over your own life, that no one can take away. The journey also taught me to value silence, that space where we listen to our hearts without external interference. It was in this silence that I realized that giving everything is not a virtue when it empties us. True generosity only exists when born of balance, when we give without exhausting ourselves, when we offer without losing ourselves in the process. And this mindset freed me from a trap I'd carried for years, the idea that love requires constant sacrifice. No, love requires presence, partnership, and respect. Sacrifice without return is not love, it's self-abandonment. And you know what strikes me most when I think about it today? How impossible it all seemed before it happened. I thought I wouldn't have the strength, that I couldn't face the consequences, that I couldn't bear to see my life fall apart. But what I discovered was exactly the opposite. When you refuse to live a lie, the truth, however painful, comes as liberation. It was a shock, yes, but it was also the beginning of a rebirth that brought new colors to my life. Of course, there are still scars. No one goes through something like this without bearing scars. But today, I look at these marks as symbols of a journey. They're like memories tattooed on my skin, showing that I survived, that I learned, and that I will never again allow anyone to make me forget who I am. This is the true impact of a radical decision. It not only changes the present, but also resignifies the past and opens space for a different future. So, if I could sum it all up in one sentence, it would be this. Sometimes giving everything isn't love, it's losing yourself. And having the courage to take back, even if it hurts, can be the beginning of true freedom. This is the kind of decision that changes destinies, transforms mindsets, and reveals hidden strengths. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's real. And that's exactly what makes the journey so powerful. Tell me in the comments. I know that feeling. I'd love to hear if you've ever faced a decision like this. If you've made it this far, it's because this story somehow resonated with your own journey. And that's why I want to extend a simple invitation. If this content resonated with you, if it sparked reflections worth carrying with you, subscribe to the channel to continue following these conversations that always go beyond the surface. Each video I prepare aims to open new perspectives and, who knows, help you see truths that transform. Also, leave a comment below, just so I know you stuck it out. Write something like, "I'm with you until the end." I'd love to see who's walked with me this far. And of course, please like the video, not as an obligation, but as a way to strengthen the connection we've created throughout this story. This simple gesture shows me that we're on the same page. And if you want to dive even deeper into this topic, there's a video right here that complements everything we discussed. Click and stay with me there.